would like to start by making certain that everybody is within arm's reach of hymnals. We thin them out, we pass them around. You guys back there don't have any, but there's lots around. So either move where they are or someone will pass you some. And if you find yourself without hymnals, do you have in the second row back there? Up there? Yeah. There are a couple sets down here. There are plenty to go around if we share. So just kind of look around, and if somebody's looking distraught, then if it's distraught about hymnals, there's something you can do about it.
We have lights over here.
That would be nice.
If we knew how to turn them
The switch is right there. Whoa.
Much nicer. Well, as we get started here this evening, we thought this weekend we're talking about stories of healing, and I'd like to tell a bit of a story of my own through song, and it needs a little bit of a preface, and I've written it out so I don't get long-winded. The impact of violence is felt not only by those who experience it firsthand, but also by their families, friends, and communities. A close friend of both Louise and me, Glenn Lapp, was killed in Afghanistan in 2010, along with 9 other members of an international assistance mission medical team. I'm curious how many of you knew this story? Good, okay, a number of you. Good. They were ambushed on their way back to Kabul after trekking into a remote region. Glenn had expressed how much he loved those rugged mountains of Afghanistan and the Afghan people. And he told me by Skype just a few weeks before the trip how eager he was to get outside the walls of their compound in Kabul. The team included Afghans and Americans with decades of experience there, and the medical care they provided was greatly appreciated. What senseless dying. I did a lot of crying in the weeks after Glenn died. We all cried together, sang together, and prayed together. We celebrated Glenn and his life in every way we could, but the pain of his loss remains. As I prepared to sing for Glenn's memorial service, I found that singing and writing were healing, and they were helping me to make some kind of sense out of this tragedy. Eventually, I realized I had to let go of the burden of anger. And I had. I did not want vengeance. It wouldn't help anyway. I only wanted the violence to somehow come to an end. Fallen comrade who never wanted any part of this civil war. Your body broken, senselessly hunted by men who knew anger full bore. And I wonder how might they feel now, these men who so blindly slew you. Yet somehow I can let go, for they surely know not what they do. Oh, how I wish they had taken the time to get to know you and your companions, because they could know a friend genuine instead of some empty redemption. And I wonder where might they be now, these men who so blindly slew you. Yet somehow I can let go, for they surely know not what they special place in your heart for the pain and forgotten children everywhere. And you brought smiles to their faces. These are some ways I will remember you. Resilient and calm, lithe as a cat, wise and curious, humble yet sure. You laughed like Snoopy, head thrown back, gentle and kind, with a ready smile. You saw the forest and the trees, graceful hands, athletic, agile. You ate rhubarb raw like celery. And I wonder what might they think now, these men who so blindly slew you. And somehow I can let go, for they surely know not what they do. I know they've lost loved ones too, their bodies broken, spirits lost. Through centuries of invaders who might look like me, oh what a cost. And they must wonder how might we feel now, is our vengeance so blinded us to. That's how I can let go, for we surely know not what we do. Yeah, that's how I can let go, for I surely know not what I do. It feels a little hard to start a service like that. And I was trying to figure out what would be a nice song to follow. And I'm willing to talk about this after the service at any time if you want to talk about that song, and I'm interested in hearing what you took out of it. I'll just share it for what it is. If you will turn with me to, actually you don't need to, but if you would like to turn in the purple book to number 97, Silence My Soul. 97. This song doesn't get sung very much, at least not in my church, and it may be very new to you, and that's okay. It's great, actually. It is. It's actually fairly simple. You may notice if you look at it that each phrase that is spoken, each phrase of words and every line is actually repeated. So the way we will do this is that I will sing one phrase and you will sing the repeat. So I will line it out and you'll sing the repeat. I will line it out, you'll sing the repeat. And after I sing the line, Louise will bring a little chime and then I'll bring you in, okay? And there's also a really interesting drone that goes on through the song. If you have a lower voice, you can sing that note. Right? And sing, if you will, the words, silence my soul, and you can sing those words at your own tempo, your own speed, your own rate. Just sing them as you wish, not in any rhythm necessarily. Silence my soul, and if you have a higher voice, you can sing silence my soul, silence my soul. Silence my soul, 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 silence my need is for some of you to keep that going through the song. So if there's some of you who feel that that's your thing, you're just going to hold that down, that's great. We need you. If you'd like to sing the repeats of the melody, you can do that as well. So please, let's keep the drone going. If you hear the drone falling apart, please sing the drone. Okay. Silence my soul, 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 silence my silence my soul, these trees are prayer. Silence my soul, these trees are prayer. I ask the tree, I ask the tree, tell me about God. Tell me about God. That it blossom. That it blossom. Silence my soul, the sun is prayer. Silence my soul, the sun is prayer. I ask the sun, tell me about God. Tell me about God. Then it shines. Then it shines. Silence my soul, the moon is prayer. Silence my soul, the moon is prayer. I ask the moon, I ask the moon, tell me about God. Tell me about God. Then it glows. Then it glows. Silence my soul, the earth is prayer. 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 I ask the earth, I ask the earth, tell me about God. Tell me about God. Then it gave life. Then it gave life.
And in your hymnal, is this on? These things don't work with me. Sorry. 371 in the hymnal, please. Let there be light, Lord God of hosts. And I invite you to stand. And maybe if you're willing to do this, think of yourself as a choir, so you're standing shoulder to shoulder across the aisles. You don't have to do that if that's too weird for you, but this is not a room that's designed very well for singing, so we'll have to do what we can to help ourselves. Let there be light, Lord God of hosts. Let there be wisdom on the earth. Let broken hands be heard. Let there be deeds set of hosts. Within our passion, hearts and still, Lord, come and straight and strong. Make us thy ministers of light. Purge us from lust that curse and kill. Give us the peace of vision clear, to speak others for our own, to joyous suffer not alone, the love that casteth out all fear. Let war and waste of warfare cease, that useful labor take fill, its songs and love and laughter fill. God give thy wayward children peace. A reading from The Cure of Sorrow, a book of blessings for times of grief by Jan Richardson. This is called Blessing in a Time of Violence. Which is to say, this blessing is always. Which is to say, there is no place this blessing does not long to cry out in lament, to weep its words in sorrow, to scream its lines in sacred rage. Which is to say, there is no day this blessing ceases to whisper into the ear of the dying, the despairing, the terrified. Which is to say, there is no moment this blessing refuses to sing itself into the heart of the hated and the hateful, the victim and the victimizer, with every last ounce of hope it has. Which is to say that there is none that can stop it, halt its course, none that will still its cadence, none that will delay its rising, none that can keep it from springing forth from the mouths of us who hope, from the hands of us who act, from the hearts of us who love, from the feet of us who will not cease our stubborn, aching, marching, until this blessing has spoken its final word, until this blessing has breathed its benediction in every place, in every tongue. Peace, peace, peace. In your purple book, please turn again, or turn back a little further, to number 78. I wish I had taken time to look up who Leith Fisher is. I don't know if someone of you knows, and you could tell us later. The text writer. This is a hymn that is an old tune. Johann Kruger, who was, as you see, in the 1640s. This is a harmonization by Bach, so you have lots of moving notes, especially if you're in the inner parts. I'm going to play it one time through so you can hear it, and then I'll invite you to sing. This is a most unusual text. We have never sung this in my church, and we thought it was maybe risky to sing it here, but we also heard that you are fine singers and you like to take chances. I'm making that part up. I don't know if you do or not. But I think you probably do. And so I'd like you to hear the words so that they're not new as you're going by the first time. Lord Jesus, as the shadows long are stealing across your path, we turn and see you kneeling with towel in hand, the servant way revealing all for our healing. Strange majesty we find at work before us as we, unnerved, take up the ready chorus, keep back, great Lord, we would rather revere you than be so near you. Yet still you come, on God's low road persisting, from force and power so quietly desisting, your every act upon love's way insisting, quell our resisting. I invite you to stand and to hum along first time as I play it, and then we'll sing.
And finally, in the hymnal, number 148, By the Waters of Babylon, number 148. I find it interesting that this song, the psalm that the song is based on, I believe comes from the Israelite story when they were taken captive, taken out of their country, made slaves, and this was their singing of their loss and their longing for their homeland, their Jerusalem, their Zion. And today, in modern times, we can think of Palestinians maybe singing a similar song, and they're longing for Jerusalem. They're longing for what they consider to be a homeland. Also, those who were captive in early America, enslaved Africans. Also, immigrants forced out of their country into a new country, longing for their homeland, longing for a home, perhaps. So the song, the melody of this song, I think is very evocative of mourning, loss, and that mourning and loss is so universal. Maybe it's a common ground that we can find with each other.
Could we have one person who knows this song well, who would jump down here quickly and be the third leader? Yes, thank you, thank you.
Because we would like to do this in a round, but first let's do it all together.
Stay on that side, Daryl.
Okay. So we can divide like we did the other day, sort of down here and down here is the second part, first part, which is kind of thin over there. So the thinner middle here would be the second part. And so you probably know the song already. Do you want to stand? I see some nods. If you want to stand, you're welcome to. If you don't, it's fine. All together. By the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. I think you have it already. So let's do our round, starting on number one over here. Ready? By the waters of Babylon, we sat and wept we sat down and wept for thee, Zion. We sat down and wept for thee, Zion. We sat down and wept Zion. We sat down and wept for thee, Zion. We sat down and wept for thee, Zion. We sat down and wept we sat back and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. We remember thee, Zion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daryl and Louise, and those of you who are first time, one of our worship sessions, I'll just say that's Daryl Snider and Louise Ranck have been engaged to be our worship leaders this weekend, and I'm very grateful for that. And they're from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and that's where
Use the standing mic, it's not on.
does it work now?
No. Use the standing mic.
Use the standing mic.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're connected. Okay. Well, thank you, Louise Ranck and Daryl Snider, for again, appreciate that. I'm Kenton Derstine. I've been on the board and am happy to be facilitate some pieces of this evening. And the next component of our evening is to invite several presentations of programs or efforts that align with Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship vision and mission. And the first person I'm going to invite to give a brief presentation is Doug Raper-Neufeld regarding the sustainable climate solutions.
Great, thank you. I'm a little taller, so I'm always bending over these microphones. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. It's been a great pleasure to be here this weekend to represent the Center for Sustainable Climate Solutions. I'll just tell you a few things about that. We had a couple of great sessions this morning and this afternoon to talk in more detail about climate issues and how climate issues are impacting health right now. We are a multi-institutional center, so we are a collaborative effort of Eastern Mennonite University, Goshen College, and Mennonite Central Committee. And our mandate is to work with the Mennonite Church in moving the needle on climate issues. And so we have programming in a number of areas. We're working with some training and congregational leaders. Have somebody who's working with pastoral workshops. If you're interested in that type of thing, please see me sometime. We have interns and fellows working on campuses. And then we have programs in innovative solutions, working with people that have expertise in everything from solar issues to theological issues. And I will just say that this is really important for the healthcare field, not only because of the impact that it has on health, but also, as we talked about in the sessions this morning and this afternoon, because healthcare professionals are among the most trusted individuals for people in the public as they hear about climate issues. So we are very keen to keep connecting with professionals in this area. And we have a table over there by the registration area, and so please, you're welcome to stop by and pick up some materials and talk to me as you have questions.
Thank you. And I do want to pause and give a special welcome to anyone from the community or from wherever who are coming here, who aren't a part of the whole weekend. We're real grateful that we could extend the invitation for this evening's program to any community people or family connections or whoever would just join us for this evening. So a special welcome to you. And the next person that is, I'll invite Yolanda Yoder, who is part of the Southern Indiana Community Healthcare Center. Welcome.
My voice is quiet, so we need to get closer.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to talk today. Wanted to talk a little bit about a practice, primary care practice that has been, has Anabaptist roots going way back in the 1970s. My husband and I both are physicians in Southern Indiana Community Healthcare. And it's an organization that started in 1974 with some of the original members being names that many of you may know from Indiana Connections, Eddie and Wally Schellenberger, Terry Knopfsinger, Eric Lehman, Luke Bozeman, several of the people that started the group. And it started as a kind of an area of service to a community. Southern Indiana is about an hour northwest of Louisville, 2 hours straight south of Indianapolis. In an area that's a combination of farmlands coming right up against Appalachia kind of terrain and lack of opportunity. To just spell it out more clearly, poverty rate is about 51% there. Some areas of the county have not graduated from high school at about 21%, and that number is increasing over time. A lot of lack of access both to opportunities, to jobs, and healthcare. So our organization has been there. It's called Southern Indiana Community Healthcare, and we've been a not-for-profit for 44 years now, and just recently became a federally qualified health center as a way of kind of maintaining our financial viability into the future. And what that status means is that we are paid a little bit higher for Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement for patients other than what fee-for-service would be. But we've tried to maintain our independence from large organizations so that we can be responsive to the needs of the community. To sustain our organization into the future, to provide for this community, we are looking for positions. We have openings for positions. Right now, we're filled for our nurse practitioner roles, but also in the future, hope to have some counseling options open as well. We just are adding some addiction medicine services. Some of you may be familiar with the outbreak of HIV in Southern Indiana, which is just about a county and a half over from us. We're 200 people in one small town were identified as being HIV positive. And the opiate crisis and injection medication is part of that. There's a huge need and opportunity in Southern Indiana to try to impact that population as well. So many opportunities for learning new skills as a provider. Addiction medicine is one of them. Really try to look at what it takes to offer both mind, body, and spirit care to a group of people who are needing so much care. So if you know of anyone in your community who is looking for a role as a physician, and students, anyone who goes to church that might be in residency, that you think that would be a good fit for their value set, we'd really appreciate that. And kind of looking and talking with the organization here about how we can maybe identify Anabaptist students over time who might be interested in Anabaptist opportunities. So there would be a great time for conversation too on how to keep those connections going, which is really the future of this organization, the future of some of our healthcare system opportunities. So thank you very much.
And I'd like to invite Larry Eby to inform us and update us regarding the Mary Jean Yoder Fund.
Sure.
You always know way to find out whether he's already.
Hello. Yolanda, I spent 2 years with Wally and Heavy in Nigeria in the pre-Biafra days, so know them very well. I've been administrator of the Mary Jean Yoder Fund now since 2004, and in your packets is my report, which tells you basically everything that you need to know, but I just want to put my face on that report. The Mary Jean Yoder Fund really belongs to both this organization and that Mission Network. The funds are lodged legally as being part of Mennonite Mission Network because that's the way it was set up. And Dr. Mary Jean Yoder was the daughter of Dr. Jonathan Yoder, who was a longtime missionary in India, and she had hoped to go to India, or she had hoped to be a missionary doctor, but was tragically killed in an auto accident right before she started her internship after she graduated from medical school. So the family set up this fund, and some other people contributed. We give out, as you can see in the report, somewhere around $6,000 to $7,000 a year to students in various types of healthcare in various parts of the world. And my biggest problem is to stay connected with certain areas and not lose them. For instance, Kenya was a big one in our portfolio for a while, and now I have nobody from Kenya, mainly because I haven't been able to continue any connection with somebody on that end. So anyway, it's your fund in a sense, in that most of the board members are appointed by this group. Stan Gottschalk is one of our, it's not a board, it's a benefits committee, and Paul Lichty is sort of a member, a reluctant maybe, and anyway, all of them are appointed by this group except for a member from the mission board and a member from the Yoder family. So it is really a fund of this group, but it is administered by me under contract with the scholarship committee. So just to let you know, and you may have seen I have pictures up of many of the Indian students. I don't get many pictures from Africa, so I couldn't put any up, but we do have some grantees in Tanzania particularly. At one time it was mostly medical students, now it's heavy on the nursing and other ancillary, which kind of fits with this group as we become more diversified in the Mennonite Health Fellowship compared to the Mennonite Medical Association, which was the preceding group. So thank you very much.
Now it's my pleasure and to introduce our speaker for the evening, Bill Swartley, presenting to us on pacifist in a war zone. And when Paul and some of the board members who were coming he was emailing around wondering who might introduce Bill, I confess that I had some, or the question was, did anybody have some connection that would, so I confess that I did. Bill grew up just down the road from where I grew up on a nearby farm, and recollect Bill growing up, and he reported some stories in our reconnecting. Actually, we hadn't reconnected from high school until last year's Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship gathering at Laurelville, and in Laurelville, so that was great to make that connection. But he recalls wandering down to our farm and being put to work, driving the tractor. My older brothers, loaded the bales on the hay, and I guess there was so anyway. And the other memory that I have is that we both went to Christopher Dock, and I think, Bill, you were maybe 2 or 3 years older than I am, but when he was a senior, his dad got him a VW, a little VW, not a microbus, but bug, in which my sister and I and 2 others, 3 of us crammed in the back seat, and we rode Bill drove us to school for 1 year. And in that little VW Beetle. So that was quite a year, and it's still hard for me to imagine how we squeezed in there, but I think that's what we did. The other thing we shared was older sisters who were friends and went to school as well. So there's a variety of ways that our families were connected. Bill, after graduating from Christopher Dock, went to Heston College and then graduated from Friends University in Kansas, transplanting himself to Kansas, and then earning taking his training to become a nurse anesthetist at the University of Kansas. That launched his career, 40 plus years and counting, I think, as a nurse anesthetist. And apparently you lived in this community for a while and are actually filling in for some locally in some healthcare in that role that I just learned. One thing I learned that I hadn't known at all is what I came to think of as a long-term commitment to short-term mission work. Bill has served over 25 short-term mission assignments around the world. And most recently, just even this spring, was on a mercy ship off the coast of Cameroon, Africa. 1 year ago, he spent a month in Iraq, which he will be presenting about, but he's also been in various South American countries, Peru, Ecuador, and other places around the world. So we'll just be hearing just a glimpse of the variety of mission trips that he's been on as a nurse anesthetist. So at this time, I'm very happy to invite Bill to come and present to us this evening on pacifist in the war zone.
Thank you very much, Kenton.
I hope that all those days crammed in the back of my Volkswagen were formative times for you.
It was definitely a green or a, yes,
It was wonderful.
economical.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak this evening and to tell you a bit about my story. And I want to thank especially the people from the local area here, Bluffton and other areas close by and far away. My sister has traveled from Philadelphia, from Souderton to be here tonight. So thank you all very much for coming. I'm honored by your presence. Well, there is plenty of pain and suffering in this world, some of it of our own doing, much of it preventable, and all of it heartbreaking. But these stories from a faraway, remote part of the world brought me to a new understanding of the depths of suffering and the evilness of war. Though this experience is now a year past, in many ways it is as fresh in my mind as if it happened yesterday. My stories may be a year old, but the reality is that for many of these patients who continue to live with the results of the lust for power and anger and rage and disregard for the dignity of life. Carol Bellamy, former director of UNICEF, has recently said that there are more civilians, mostly women and children, caught in conflict in war around the world now than at any previous time. That fact, sadly, is not a year old. From my journal, I do not fear death. I fear my mother's tears. The sirens awaken me. My watch says 4:50 a.m., nearly time to get up anyway. I pull on scrubs and wander over to the ER tent. He is about 20 years old, healthy, muscular guy with thick black hair. He is moving, grabbing, trying to sit up. The staff is holding him down, starting IVs, giving oxygen with an ambu bag. The ER doc sees me. Bill, we need to intubate to control his airway. His Glasgow score is 7. We're sending him to Erbil as soon as we can stabilize. It's then that I see the blood-soaked towels and the sponges under his head. It's a gunshot to the head. He struggles to sit up again, and the wound is revealed. Open, nasty laceration on the back of his head, bits of bone and brain mixed in his hair. He is a policeman from East Mosul. East Mosul is variously controlled by the Iraqi military, several independent factions, and a few small enclaves where ISIS is still in charge. Their influence, by reports that we receive, continues to decrease, although they still conduct raids, deploy suicide bombers, stage snipers who target anyone they can find. We're not sure if this 20-year-old policeman was on duty or just at the wrong place at the wrong time, but the sniper hit his mark, and he is now in our ER. For the next hour, we work on him, try to stabilize him, give him IV fluids and medications to protect his brain, intubate him and control his airway and breathing. We hope his wound is superficial. It is his only hope and his only chance. A repeat x-ray of his head reveals shift of his brain toward the left side, a very negative prognosticative sign. He has become still, no longer moving or trying to sit up. Activity around him slows down. There is now no reason to continue to stabilize him. It is hopeless. We remove his breathing tube and his IVs. I noticed a tattoo on his chest. We hadn't seen it before, we'd been too busy. Jamir, one of the Iraqi caregivers, reads it out to us in English. I do not fear death. I fear my mother's tears. He is moved to a special section of the ER tent, going black, the palliative care area. It is protected, isolated from the rest of the hospital. Nurses will sit with him, talk with him, pray for him, reassure him, perhaps wash his face and hands, and stay by his side until he takes his last breath. Later that morning, I see Janelle Martin, our Mennonite ER doc, sitting in silence by his bedside, along with one of our nurses. On this day, his mother will shed many tears. One day last March, I was flipping through Facebook when this ad came up. Urgent, medical workers needed for Samaritan's Purse International Disaster Assistance Response Teams in Mosul, Iraq. Somehow the urgency of that hit me, kind of like a blow to the gut. I quickly moved on to the next Facebook submission, but the images did not leave me. And a few days later, I talked to Susie about it, and as she always does with my crazy mission trips, she said, if you have to go, go. About the same time, I learned that a friend of mine, Scott Spira-Digliosi from Blanchard Valley Health Systems, who works right here in Bluffton, my former employer, was going to go. If Scott could go, I could go. So I applied to Samaritan's Purse.
I didn't know that.
Samaritan's Purse is a huge organization. This is part of their headquarters in Boone, North Carolina. They have more resources than any other faith-based NGO in the world. Last year, their budget was about $600 million. They have hundreds of employees in Boone and thousands around the world. They do all kinds of rescue work and building projects, water projects, food projects on every continent and in many countries. They have their own jets and airplanes, trucks, and and worldwide offices. The CEO of Samaritan's Purse is Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son.
Sure.
Graham was an early supporter of President Trump, and they are quite politically and theologically conservative. Early on, I thought maybe my more liberal views in some areas would disqualify me for consideration for the trip. But they either saw me as part of their mission, or they were desperate for help. But after an extended interview process, I did get accepted to travel to Mosul. So during the month of June, almost exactly 1 year ago, I worked at Samaritan's Purse Field Hospital on the plains of Nineveh near Mosul, Iraq. Perhaps no other single experience has so influenced me and my thinking about how we live together as people and how we choose the qualities of compassion and integrity that we bring to relationships. Even now, 1 year later, seldom does a day go by that I'm not reminded by some person or event or even a sound or a smell of my time on the Nineveh plain. While I was at the EFH, the Emergency Field Hospital, the coalition fighters began a push to finally rid the city of Mosul of ISIS fighters. They largely achieved that goal by August of last year. In fact, on July 10th, 2017, the Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, declared that the forces had officially run ISIS out of the city of Mosul, which were one of the two cities that the Caliphate claimed as its capital, the other being Raqqa in Syria. You might remember the bombing of the El Nouri Mosque in Mosul. Built in the 12th century, its destruction marked the capitulation of ISIS over the city. They decided that if they could not have the city, then no one else could have it either. They reduced the city to rubble, especially the old city. The old city of Mosul had been a tourist destination. Its narrow streets and markets and old world atmosphere drew Iraqi travelers and others to see its sights. Mosul was a world-class city with 13 hospitals, 3 major universities, including Mosul University, which alone had 23 colleges and technical schools and over 42,000 students, but no more. When ISIS took over the city, teachers and the medical staff fled. The physicians who stayed were no longer allowed to examine patients of the opposite sex, and medical supplies vanished due to looting by ISIS. Medical waste accumulated, and medications became rare and very expensive. All universities and colleges shut down, and in 2015, Mosul University was bombed, most likely by the United States, and its collection of 1 million books and manuscripts and maps were either burned by ISIS radicals or destroyed by the bombing. So now the old city is just a pile of rubble, and although Trump declared victory over ISIS in Iraq last July, it's a bit of a hollow claim. While the ISIS states groups rule is largely gone in Iraq, the seeds of it are still there for it or a successor extremist group to rise up again one day in the future. The culture left behind by ISIS will be there for a very long time. ISIS poetry and songs are firmly ingrained in the children of Mosul and are still being used and taught by the imams and the jihadi supporters. Just in case you're a little fuzzy about where Iraq is and the countries around it, you will remember that Iraq is bordered by Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Iran, and just a small border with Kuwait. In landmass, it's about the same size as California, or about 3 times the size of Ohio. The borders of present-day Iraq were drawn by the English in the Sykes-Picot Agreement after World War I, and by Churchill in about 1920, when English granted some autonomy and redrew some of the boundary lines, changing Mesopotamia into Iraq, Iran, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. There are 3 main groups or factions in the country of Iraq. There are Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, and the Kurdish people. And while there's a great deal of mixing of these 3 groups in the country, the Kurds claim 1/3 of the country, or 1/4 of the country in the north. So cities like Kirkuk and Erbil are actually in Kurdistan, a division of Iraq. The Kurdish independent spirit is a continued bone of contention for the political leadership in Baghdad. A vote last fall to secede Kurdistan from Iraq brought about internal military conflict to Kurdistan, especially in Kirkuk, where vast oil supplies exist. Mosul is just outside the borders of Kurdistan, and the population there is a mix of Kurds and Arabs. I am certainly no expert on Muslims. However, it may be helpful to understand just a little bit about the complex situation in these countries and about the Muslim world. Again, there are two main groups, Sunni and Shia, or Shiite, and they are largely separated by their understandings from the Prophet Muhammad, his teachings, and his traditions. When the Prophet died in 640, he had left no sons, and he had named no successor or leader who could carry on the message. So into this vacuum emerged these two subgroups of Muslims, Sunni and Shia. The Sunnis believe that a leader should be elected by a vote of the Islamic community, choosing their imams from scores of Islamic students and preachers. The Shiites believe that only Allah could elect leaders, and therefore only direct descendants of Muhammad's family could be leaders. After Prophet Muhammad's death, the Shia elected Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, to be the rightful leader. The Shia also rejected the first three Sunni leaders who were elected following Muhammad's death. But because the Shia were in a minority and relatively powerless, the first 5 leaders of the Shia branch of the Islamic faith were assassinated by the Sunnis, and the 6th was a child who went into hiding and was never publicly seen again. He is still revered as a caliph and has a mystic presence in their religion. In the book Between Two Worlds, Zainab Salvi writes that the Shia understand the need to apply independent reasoning to contemporary life, often assuming a more liberal stance, while the more conservative Sunnis rely on doctrines established centuries ago. Sunnis mostly live in Saudi Arabia, Oman, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Libya, Turkey, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Indonesia, and they constitute about 80% of all Muslims worldwide. The remaining 20% of Muslims are Shia, and they are mostly in Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, India, and Pakistan. Only 2 countries in the world have a clear majority of Shia. Iran is 80%, and Iraq is about 65% Shia, while India and Pakistan are about 50-50 Shia and Sunni. So in Iraq, 65% of the Iraqi Arab population is Shia Muslim, and the remaining population are Sunni, 20% Arab, and 15% Kurdish Sunni. The Kurds are mainly secular Sunnis, while the Arab Sunnis are more conservative. The ISIS militants were also Sunni, but very conservative. So by tradition, the Kurdish people have viewed conservative Islam to be one of the major forces oppressing their people. So while they had to accommodate themselves somewhat to Islam, to some degree, they became more secular in their beliefs rather than taking their Muslim religion as seriously as the vast majority of Muslims. So when I asked a Kurdish woman with a headscarf, which was different from every other headscarf of every other Muslim woman at the hospital, how they decided what type of garment they would wear, she told me that when a girl reaches about age 15, she has to decide how she wants to appear in public. It's a decision based on her family's tradition, her own wishes and convictions, her mosque, and her imam. She said, freedom isn't the ability to do anything. I don't want that kind of freedom, she said. In your country, women are treated as trading goods. They're used in advertisements to sell soap, shampoo, and a pair of socks. That is not valuing women. My time in Iraq was during the holy month of Ramadan, but not all Muslims observed the fast, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. They ate and drank, the ones who did, ate and drank before the sun came up and then after the sun went down. And they would pile huge plates of food on tables and sit in front of them until just the right minute when the sun was down, and then eat a lot. The Arab Muslims were observing their holy custom, and the Kurds and the Arabs in sort of different ways at times. In addition to the Sunni and Shia groups in Iraq, there are also Christian Kurdish, Christian Iraqi, including the Armenian Church, the Syrian Orthodox, the Syrian Catholics, the American Catholics, and a variety of Protestant churches. There's also other ethnic groups, Yazidis and Turkmen as well. After Saddam was gone, many Christians migrated to the small towns around Mosul seeking religious freedom, and there they became targets of ISIS. Now into this mix, let's add some political differences of all these groups, and things get quite complex. Remember that Saddam was a Sunni, the minority population in Iraq, but the majority population in the world, and he ruled with an iron hand, persecuting the majority Shia and generating tremendous anger and resentment among the Shia elite. When the United States invaded the country in 2003 and executed Saddam, they allowed the people to have a democratic election, and of course, the majority Shia came to rule and chose Nouri Maliki as their prime minister. Maliki put a Shia-dominated coalition government into place, but he refused to incorporate any Sunnis into any power and positions of power in his government. Well, right now, at this point, Fuad Massam, a minority Sunni, has been the president of Iraq since 2014. Massam is a Kurd, a smart guy with a PhD in Islamic philosophy. And he appointed a new prime minister, Abate, an Arab Shia. But Maliki, also a Shia, refused to recognize the appointment and considered it illegal. But over time, because of the recognition from his own party and from pressure from world leaders, Maliki finally did step down under protest and allowed Maliki to take over. So now that you understand that the Arab Sunnis are a majority in the world, but a minority in Iraq, and that the Shia dominate power in the government, this is one reason why the conservative Sunnis population may have been willing to allow ISIS to gain some power in their cities and towns. Many Sunnis viewed the initial goals of ISIS to restore morality and true faith as needed reforms. Iraq Sunnis are deeply conservative, and they feel oppressed under the majority Shia. And again, they're more reliant on ancient doctrines than contemporary interpretations. So a group that promised to bring morality, uplift Sunni Islam, and implement God's laws had some appeal in many communities. But instead, the self-declared caliphate turned into a bloody horror. The electricity was cut, and then the water, the markets went silent. ISIS committed atrocities on a huge scale, including sexual slavery, punishments that included stonings, beheadings, amputations, and whippings. The simplest infractions, such as having a smartphone, could result in a beheading in the public square. ISIS did not want people communicating with the outside world on a smartphone with texting pictures or recording their atrocities. They looted and stole, destroyed ancient holy places. A male healthcare worker was given 50 lashes and imprisoned for dressing the wrist wound of a female, and he was lucky not to have lost his head. The complexities of these political and religious factions in the country were then, and are still to some degree, a catalyst for violent change in the country. One of the Iraqi surgeons that I had several conversations with said to me, "Don't expect to see the fighting stop when ISIS is out of the country. Our people have been fighting for 1,000 years. Soon," he said, "factions will be fighting for control of Mosul and the vast resources of our country." And sadly, following the secession vote, that prediction has come true. There continues to be arrests and revenge killings against those who have been believed to support ISIS. The city of Erbil, 60 miles south, is where the team members flew into and out of for rotations to the hospital or the EFH. It's about a 2-hour ride from the hospital in the desert to the town of Bartella. The fighting, when I was at the hospital, was about 8 miles away in downtown Mosul. My flight arrived in Erbil at about 2 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and since my luggage apparently was 3 days behind me, still in Chicago, it didn't take me very long to clear customs and find my ride to Samaritan's Purse. After a few hours of sleep, Craig, the other anesthetist, and I quickly completed our IED, avoidance, bomb identification, and safety training in preparation for travel to the hospital compound. So shortly after noon, we were on the way to the hospital, to Bartella and the emergency field hospital. Along the way, there were about 6 checkpoints with soldiers asking questions and inspecting our luggage. There was more damage and destruction everywhere along the way, with trenches and bunkers dug into the earth. There are also two this bridge along the River Zab was also blown by the Iraqi forces to prevent ISIS from reaching Erbil, the next large city south of Mosul. There are also two World Health Organization refugee camps along the way, very close to the highway, which we are told held 60,000 civilians in very close quarters in tents, most of them from Mosul. The approach to the hospital is through a serpentine roadway with two buses blocking the entrance. 4 guards with AK-47 automatic weapons stopped our vehicle, removed our luggage and us, and searched under the vehicle using a bomb dog to inspect our luggage and the vehicle. Then they moved one of the buses away and allowed us to move closer to the blast walls that surround the hospital. Near the hospital, there are several trucks with 50 caliber machine guns mounted on them and guards at each of the 3 passageways through the wall. Security at the EFH was provided by the Iraqi military and by a private security firm. The hospital compound was about 5 acres, again surrounded by 15-foot high blast walls, which also divided the compound up into several smaller sections, which with housing and offices in one area, the hospital proper in one area, and the men's ward in a separate sequestered area. Almost as soon as I was in the compound, Corinne Chassé, a nurse anesthetist from Charlotte, grabbed me for a very hurried 30-minute crash course on the OR tent, the anesthesia equipment, as well as the schedule board, which still had several cases left for the day to do, before she rushed off to catch her ride back to Erbil and her flight back home. These housing units, which they call caravans and made in China, were lifted in by cranes, were basically just steel boxes which housed 8 people each, with room for about 100 men and 100 women on the base total. There were also caravans for offices, mess hall, laundry, maintenance sheds, a water treatment plant, sewage plant, technology center, other facilities. Hospital is totally self-contained. Doesn't need anything from the outside except deliveries of water every day. This was my rather messy bunk area. Each caravan had a good AC unit, so we were cool at night. They had 6 huge generators in the base, which powered all the equipment in the hospital, the AC units, and everything else. Daytime temperatures were in the 100 to 120 degree range.
Whoa.
The AC units in the OR kept the temperature down to about 85 degrees during the heat of the day. Still pretty warm. At various points in the compound, there were bunkers, which we were told to use if so advised, or if mortar started to come over the walls. We were told that if we came under attack, that the policy was to leave our patients on the OR tables and head for the bunkers. I was thankful I did not have to make a decision to abandon a patient anytime while I was there for my own safety. One of the bunkers served as a prayer tent or prayer room. Walls were covered with scriptures and drawings, messages to people, and prayers. Daily we met for worship, celebrated successes, comforted each other, and accepted human frailty. We ate together, rested together, celebrated communion together. We are North Americans, New Zealanders, Australians, Canadians, Europeans, and others. We are Catholics, Muslims, Lutherans, evangelicals, agnostics, together. One of our leaders wrote, "We have seen things that cannot be unseen." And yet what each of us will confess is that it was a sacred honor. And that for many of us, this was one of the times in our lives when all of our passions were engaged. Our professional, personal, and spiritual compassions in a community of our peers doing the right thing. Doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. 6 of the caravans also served as restrooms and showers, also air conditioned. In the hospital section, there were a series of inflatable tents which served as different parts of the hospital. 3 tents, which you can see 2 here sort of, are arranged in a T to form 2 operating rooms and a sterile preparation room. This is the inside of the instrument prep room with autoclaves and cleaning and wrapping stations. The heavy canvas floors and the walls kept out most of the dust and the dirt, but not the flies or the mice. Other tents served as ICU, step-down units, women's wards, and children's wards. Each section of the hospital had an armed guard 24 hours a day. The men's ward had a locked steel gate with an armed guard outside the door. It's hard to know who's a friend or foe, even among the injured. children were permitted to have a family member, one family member with them, although those family members had to be escorted in and out, even if they just needed to use the restroom. The emergency room tent was the largest section of the hospital with room for about 10 beds and several areas for overflow. There were a few times when that ER was packed with workers and patients, and it could get pretty wild in there. There was a system of classification for patients. A green tag meant that a patient had minor injuries. A yellow tag meant that they could be delayed. A red tag that they needed immediate care. And a black tag meant that they were going to go black or placed in the cordoned off area in one section of the hospital, the palliative care area. This area was occupied several times during my stay there. This is a picture of the entrance to the hospital. It's a little bit hard to see and it's tilted a bit because I took the picture on the slide. I wasn't really supposed to take this picture. But beyond the fan, you can see a guard with his ever-present AK across his lap. When a patient arrived outside the walls, a triage nurse was sent outside the wall to examine them. If he or she determined that the patient needed medical help, the patient was then stripped of all clothing and his body checked. Only then could he or she be admitted. Life and death is one thing, but first we make sure that the patient is not harboring an IED on him or in him. Early in the existence of the hospital, there had been several credible threats received that ISIS was planning an operation against the Christian infidels. One was a threat about a car bomb, and there was also one all alert for everyone to go to the bunkers one time when an unknown drone flew over the hospital. By the time I arrived at the EFH, these threats had largely diminished, mostly because the coalition forces had pushed the ISIS militants back across the Tigris River to the west part of Mosul. But while I was at the hospital, we could hear the drones and the bombers too high to see, most likely United States B-52s, flying over the hospital day and night. Back in the OR, we completed 5 to 15 surgeries a day, sometimes working till late at night and a few times all night. This was my world: anesthesia machine, monitors, oxygen generator, and my supplies. We had a blood bank with blood supplied by the World Health Organization, although there was a 4-unit limit for any one patient. We had no plasma and no volume expanders. During my time in the OR, we completed about 80 surgeries and about the same amount of surgeries across the hall in the second OR. Some cases were quick and easy, and a few were very, very challenging. 60% of our patients were women and children, and all were victims of blast injuries from IEDs, mortars, or gunshots. We had several general surgeons and orthopedic surgeons. Hospital, for the most part, was pretty well equipped with most of the equipment and supplies needed for trauma surgery. We had good monitors, a good machine. We had a good ultrasound machine, a good x-ray machine. One of my patients was Ibrahim. He is 13 years old and small for his age, just a bit pudgy. He looks well fed, and he smiled as I approached his bed. He was in the men's lockup part of the hospital. There was a little bit of a mischievous twinkle in his eye when I asked him questions, and he smiled again when I told him that we were going to put him to sleep to redress his hands, which had been both wrapped in bandages. He had come into the EFH 2 days earlier and had anesthesia to debride his mangled hands. Our chief of security had spent some time interviewing him, and several things about him raised red flags. He is well fed. Only ISIS sympathizers are getting enough food in West Mosul to be well fed. His age. ISIS is known to be recruiting children to build bombs, deliver bombs, and become suicide bombers. He told us that he loves to take apart computers. In this case, though, he said he picked up an unexploded mortar and then threw it to the ground, and it exploded and damaged his hands. But it's a made-up story. Had he really thrown a mortar to the ground, the explosion would have blown him into a red mist with very little, if anything, left to identify. So the real story remains untold. During a subsequent anesthetic, as he was awakening, he looked up and called me a black man, as told to me by one of the Arabic speakers in the room, an allusion to the infidel in his presence. How does a 13-year-old boy become a recruit for ISIS? Our security chief has some answers. He says it's all about worldview. He said when a child is educated in a madrasa and told from day one that all non-Muslims are the evil infidel and need to be killed, he is indoctrinated into a belief system that is every bit as valid to him as is our Christian faith that we teach our children. To be born in a country where there are few options for jobs, a life bereft of promise, the appeal to belong to a group which provides food and protection and makes promises to a wonderful afterlife seems reasonable. ISIS perpetuates these beliefs with cash payments to family who agree to supply them with flesh and blood. In some cases, ISIS also forces family to give up a child if they wish to have protection or food or both. Ibrahim recovered and was dismissed from the EFH. To go where? Back home? Back across the river to West Mosul in his life? He will not be taking apart computers or cell phones for a very long time, not with the condition of the 3 or 4 fingers that he has left on his hands. Maybe we made an impression on him, made him think about his path. Then again, maybe not. The patients often endured multiple trips to the OR for dressing changes or revisions of their wounds. Our anesthesia equipment was quite adequate with one exception, no narcotics. There were no narcotics. So you had to be very creative treating pain, especially postoperative pain. July 3, 2017, I'll never forget one of my first patients. 24-year-old Nora was forced to watch the execution of her husband, then 3 of her children shot and killed before she was told to run across the river bridge with her baby. As she was running across the improvised bridge, an ISIS fighter fired an automatic weapon, hitting her in the legs and destroying her femur. She fell to the ground, but somehow got back up, and with her baby, ran across the rest of the bridge across the river. She came to the OR in pain and fear, one hand tightly holding a headscarf covering all but her eyes. I waited to put heart monitor patches on her until after she was asleep, sparing her the indignation of a male putting patches on her, EKG patches on her shoulders and sides. She came to the OR several times for wound washout and revision of her injuries. Like many patients, Nora was emaciated from very low blood count and from very poor diet and from blood loss. She was unable to nurse her baby when she came to us, but a mother of another child who was in our ICU offered to also nurse Moore's baby. Most of the civilians in ISIS-controlled areas had very little access to food. I also remember a small girl with blast injuries. Since she had arrived at the EFH, she had not spoken. No one knew if she had a family or even her name. We named her Nadia. She came to my OR. When she came to my OR for debridement of her wounds, she was covered with dirt, her hair filled with mud and gravel. She was expressionless, no language to speak the unspeakable. The next day I watched as one of our nurses sang to her as she lovingly washed Nadia's hair. Violence numbs. Violence numbs and steals hope and joy. And violence lives beyond the statistics. When the numbers are recorded and the dead are buried, violence lives on in the banal moments of the living who still remember the violent deaths of woman, of wife and child, of destruction and of home, of mortars exploding in their kitchen. Several days later, Nadia had still not spoken. A family who lost their children adopted her as she recovered. Blast wounds can have long-term effects and they are insidious. They can cause solid organ subcapsular hemorrhage, compartment syndrome, pulmonary failure, intracranial bleeding, or edema, sometimes with late onset. This young man, Abdul, was 15 years old, had come to the hospital following a blast injury with a fractured femur and had been treated in our OR a few days before I arrived. He seemed to be doing fine, and he captured the hearts of many caregivers with his effervescent cheerfulness and wit. But almost without warning, 3 days after arriving at the EFH, he developed systemic organ failure and began an irretrievable downward spiral into chaos. And he was dead within 24 hours, despite all efforts. Of course, one of the highlights of a trip like this is the meeting and working with outstanding people. This man here, Paul, a nurse from Canada, was the OR supervisor for the first 2 weeks I was at the EFH. He had been working there for about 3 months. Kelly Warner, the nurse next to him, is from Australia, and she and I worked together nearly every day. She served 2 tours with the EFH. Kelly is an excellent surgical nurse, and she made my job much easier. We also worked with Iraqi doctors and nurses. These two emergency room docs wanted to learn about anesthesia and how to intubate and ventilate patients, so I spent quite a bit of time with them. They had been trained in Baghdad and both spoke very good English and were very bright and friendly. Besides the people in the OR, the nurses in the hospital were also very special people who interrupted their lives to serve in Iraq, some for only 3 weeks and some for months. This man, Don, an intensive care nurse, and his wife had been at the EFH for several months. It was not unusual to see off-duty nurses in the hospital wards just spending time with patients, encouraging them, playing games with the kids, or searching for ways to give comfort. The Iraqis, too, worked in all areas of the hospital. Here's a bunch of them with some of the members of the surgery team. They were a mix of Sunni, Shia, and Kurds, some Christian, some Muslim, and all of them risking their lives and their family's safety if they're discovered cooperating with the Westerners in their land. They have no illusion of about their fate if they're discovered. The surgeons, too, were great to work with. Jerry Smith here in the dark blue scrubs, on the right, I think, is a general surgeon from Colorado. Jerry and I spent a lot of time together, and he told me about his earlier life as a pastor and a marine biologist with a PhD before he went back to medical school. Since he left the EFH on the same day I did, we traveled home together as well. These two-wheeled carts look a bit primitive, but were very effective in moving patients from one place to another. On my last day, several of the Iraqi doctors wanted pictures with some of us who were leaving the EFH. This is a favorite spot in front of one of the blast walls, painted with the words "Hope" in English and Arabic. I have a few slides of injuries. And I don't want to gross anyone out, and I promise you these are the more mild pictures. But I think it's good to see the type of injuries and suffering that the Iraqi people had to endure. This is a blast injury to a leg, and you can see the shrapnel and the broken bones on this x-ray. This is very typical of the types of injuries that we saw. And this is how it is treated. This is an external fixator to immobilize the bones. 2 pins on each side of the fracture stabilize the bone until it can heal. Since all the wounds were so contaminated with dirt and gravel and shrapnel, it's not possible to use just plates and screws to repair any of these fractures. They'll just become infected. This is a bullet wound to a knee, and again with external fixation devices. Most of the wounds were left open and allowed to heal from the inside out. Near every wound had multiple segments or multiple fragments of shrapnel, and a few times we saw sort of high caliber rounds. We will serve pretty good food in Iraq with fresh vegetables, the best tomatoes ever, although not a lot of meat. 2 times there were special, we allowed rice and beans, and a couple of times a week we had chicken or lamb or goat meat. 2 times there were special treats, one evening hamburgers cooked on a grill, and another time beef kebabs. But I was in the hospital, I was in the operating room working both those times and missed out on those treats. You were daily aware of the presence of the Iraqi military outside the blast walls and in the patient wards, and the American and Iraqi security guys inside the compound, all of them carrying sidearms and some carrying assault rifles. I began to understand that I was pretty comfortable with the knowledge that these men and women were protecting me and would not hesitate to kill to protect me, protecting me in a way I would never have done for myself. What does it mean for a North American pacifist to be working in this war zone, to accept their proclivity toward lethal force for my protection? If we came under attack, how could I ever reconcile any loss of life to protect my life? Very hard questions with no easy answers. Do we Christians bear any responsibility for the pain and suffering of some of the world's most helpless and oppressed peoples? Have our actions or inactions contributed to the events that lead people to revolt against inequity and powerlessness, to bring madness and mayhem to innocent civilians in their path? Have our life choices, our priorities, individually or nationally, contributed, for example, to 60,000 people living in a refugee camp 5 kilometers south of our compound, or the tens of thousands of Iraqis or Syrians or Yemenis who have lost their lives, their livelihoods, and their homes and their lives. We have given tacit approval to our country to protect our lives of wealth and ease. We have supported military action with our tax dollars and our silence. Many of us understand that our national leaders have instilled a narrative of fear into our collective psyche, enabling us to accept walls and weapons for protection. Weapons and walls. That was the reality of life at the EFH. Iraq became a stark microcosm of life at home, where the fruits of political labor have also promised walls and profound military buildup to protect us from some of the world's most vulnerable individuals. At times, we can feel powerless to change the direction of our government or the outcome from actions by other governments or factions in faraway places. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning wrote that when we are confronted with a situation which we cannot change, we are challenged to change. I have no great intellect or even a fundamental understanding of what kinds of forces bring humans to the point of butchering and battering and raping and destroying life. We love death, the voices of ISIS proclaim, but they too were in need of medical care. Bearded, angry, sullen warriors whose wounds also needed careful treatment. They looked on us with disdain and distrust, the infidels in their midst, offering Western expertise and care which is foreign to their worldview. They were given care and compassion from our unveiled females who showed them kindness, bound up their wounds, gave them food and comfort. I remember standing bedside next to an ISIS fighter with his heavy dark beard and looking into his face, a face filled with darkness. He was immobilized with both arms bandaged, but his eyes seemed to radiate a glowering hate toward me. He was very intimidating, and it was very uncomfortable to be at his side. At some level, we all live in this dilemma of choosing the quality of compassion and integrity that we bring to relationships that are so horribly fragmented and divided. And I realized that there were Iraqis who were able to bridge this huge divide and were able to risk everything, their own lives and the lives of their families at home, to work alongside the Westerners in their midst. We were all living in the space of people who held very opposing values, who were combative and willful murderers, rapists, and torturers, but were now delivered into our hands for care. We could see and sometimes feel the pain that passed between the ISIS fighters and the Iraqis working with us, with their knowledge of destroyed homes and lives, the murder of a child in front of a mother's eyes. And yet these people had found a way to transform personal tragedy into triumph. Perhaps this is what justice looks like. People who emulate care and love in spite of the divisions and anger and desire for revenge that is the natural human response to such horrible events and pushes us to choose sides. Maybe this is justice, forgiveness, acceptance, grace, not an eye for an eye, not revenge. In his letter to the Romans, Paul writes about suffering and hope. He wrote that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, character hope. But is it really possible to have hope when surrounded by such evil and suffering? I say yes. Yes, because of Mohammed Jassim, this nurse in the OR who worked day and night with compassion and care and was a sign of hope. I say yes because of Dr. Arad Harki, an Iraqi surgeon who worked with our team and had lost part of his family, but displayed perseverance and character and hope. Just 2 examples of many signs of hope in the desert. Once in a while, someone else's misery penetrates this carapace of self-absorption under which we often scuttle around and gets deep inside of us. For me, caring for patients who were so deeply violated and maimed, and for the perpetrators filled with their guiltless rage, caused me to question my own values. Where has my focus been? Accumulating wealth? Living a life of ease and comfort? My own inadequacies are glaring. Have we American Christians focused more on which version of the Bible we read, or rooting out same-sex marriage than other snap issues than the least of these? I was hungry, I was naked, I was sick, the least of these. And yet, at the same time, living alongside of people of extraordinary courage and faith also served to reassure and deepen my faith. A faith not about quantity or certainty, but about essence, those indispensable qualities of love and kindness and caring, and a chance to offer what you hope to receive from others: honesty, transparency, and authenticity. I want to close with one final story from my journal. It is not easy to hear, but it informs us and draws us into the suffering of these people and instills in us a desire for peace and an end to war. So again, from my journal, I should say this was at the tail end of about a 30-hour stretch in the operating room, and I'm pretty sure my fatigue contributed to the emotion of this piece. But I also believe that you cannot appreciate any depth of suffering if you approach it only with your intellect. June 14, 2017, 8:45 p.m. Another mortar attack on innocent people. We hear them day and night. Quiet booms from where we are, but deadly where they fall. Another child down. No honor, no respect, no peace, no justice, no only pain, only loss, only death. The child is 4, beautiful curly black hair, broken, displaced jaw, multiple shrapnel lacerations, abdominal trauma, Cheyne-Stokes breathing, open fractures of both legs. She's crying out, breathing, stopping, starting again, open cranium. She's going to go black. She should be playing with a doll. She should be teasing her brothers. I don't even know her name. Where's her mother? It doesn't matter. She's just another casualty, cruel, inhumane, and violent. Walk away from her. Why did they even call me? Watching her die is only a distraction, but I can't. We surround her bed with training, expertise, knowledge, equipment, but it is worth nothing, useless. Move on, compartmentalize, distance. She will not be in pain soon. I'm sick to death of this never-ending pain, the senselessness of it all, the stupidity of it, the damn terror of it. My time at the EFH came to an end. Back to the layers of security, back to Erbil and my flight out, first to Vienna, then Chicago, then Wichita. It was very easy to slip back into my life of safety and ease, and very hard at the same time. I find myself going back to these stories again and again, to mourn again, to cry again. Sometimes I wonder if I'm lingering too long in this sadness. Then I hear the words of a friend, a fellow traveler from the Iraq experience. Never accept the evil in this world, she told me, and never stop grieving it. Those faces, those moments, they boil up from the shadows still these months later. Haunting, fearful glances, dark eyes, deep trust. In them I am wounded. In them I am healed.
$377 in the journal. Sing verses 1 and 3. I invite you to stand and to just hum the first time through, and we'll sing verses 1 and 3. Please stand.
What the heck? The line between here and there was bad.
I'd like to just introduce Paul Lichty right now. He's our Executive Director of Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship, and he will have some announcements for our evening and tomorrow.
This is a member of our congregation and from news. He's done these things, man. I think he's really beautiful.
It's kind of hard to know what to say after the presentation. We thank you, Bill, for your vulnerability and addressing us. We have the opportunity tomorrow morning to give to another tragic situation in our world. our offering this year will go to the Puerto Rico Trauma Awareness and Relief efforts. Briefly, most of you know that Hurricane Maria hit the island of Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017. And the damage was so widespread and so destructive that even now many lives are disrupted. This has led some of us to think about the issues of trauma and post-traumatic stress. And so in a cooperative effort from MDS, Mennonite Disaster Service, Mennonite Health Services, and Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship, we have a committee that's been working to try to bring some training and help to the local persons, particularly healthcare providers, teachers, pastors, and churches in Puerto Rico. Details are still being worked out, but we anticipate that a major funding will be from Mennonite Disaster Service, with smaller pieces from Mennonite Health Services and from Mennonite Healthcare. And so it's that piece that belongs to Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship that we will be contributing to with our offering tomorrow morning. And we will also hear that, in the service from Miriam Godshaw, who actually lived through the hurricane before she returned to Virginia last fall. There's a sheet in your packet which gives more details about this effort, and so I invite you to consider contributing. There's also, if you wish to contribute, there's also a section on our website so that we will be also receiving gifts from other MHF members and the general public. Some of you have asked, since I no longer live in Goshen, whether our MHF office is still in Goshen, and I assure you it is. We've just hired a new administrative assistant, Tim Burkholder, and he lives in Goshen. He will be continuing to check mail and perform all the office duties there in Goshen. And I will continue to work remotely from my home in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. So continue to use that post office box address and email, so everything remains as is. We have the opportunity tomorrow morning at 8:15 for those of you who are very interested in more of the organization itself of MHF, to meet the 4 board members that are here and to hear a little bit more about what's happening, what we envision, and to solicit your feedback and your ideas, and so this is an opportunity for you to share with us as well. So we'll meet in this room at 8:15, take about a half hour, 45 minutes, and be ready then. Be plenty of time for the morning session, morning worship. Morning worship will include communion service at the end of the service, and so you want to be aware of that. If you do need to leave early, please fill out the evaluation forms. Those are very helpful for us as we consider next year's event. Next year, we will be meeting at Laurelville in the same weekend in June. The details are in your program booklet, so be aware of that. Also, be sure to turn in any keys from your rooms before you leave tomorrow. And those can be turned in Marbeck at the registration table.
The battery just died.
Oh, am I supposed to be speaking?
No, I think the battery just died in that one.
Oh, okay. finally, we have the opportunity for further fellowship and what's become a tradition on Saturday evening, an ice cream social. That will be held over in Marbeck Center. If you saw at the registration desk a set of stairs that are kind of in a little room by itself, those go down right to a place called Bob's Place. And Daryl will be sharing some more of his music and stories of healing that go with that music. And so we invite you to come over there. We had said 9 o'clock, so let's try to get started, I guess, as soon after that as we can. I realize that a lot of you will want to also share with each other while you're here. That's fine, but if you can, try to move your conversations over there, and we'll share together in that way. Anyone have any questions or concerns?
Is the office at the same place at the college where you used to work?
No. The office will be, the physical office will be in Tim's home. That's all the office. That office actually was my Mennonite.net office. And I no longer work for Mennonite.net, and I'm no longer in Goshen. So we operate by a virtual office. And that's one of the ways that we keep our costs down as an organization. And we do have some reimbursement for the physical expenses of providing equipment, what we need. But Mennonite Healthcare Fellowship tries to run a very lean operation, and so that's the situation for the office.
Could we clap for Bill now? The motion is going a little bit. So.
Okay, we had our benediction. Go in peace.